historically, today as well, we find that there's a special affinity, a special relationship that every Jew has to the Pesach Seder. It seems to be the last yontif that even the secular Jew maintains a certain kind of an emotional, we would call it unconsciously spiritual connection. Yom Kippur is a close second. Talk about that in Yis Hashem another time. But the Pesach Seder. Now that does not mean that an halachic fulfillment of the Seder. It can mean some kind of an expression, a sense of a need to connect to the historic event of Klal Yisrael leaving Mitzrayim, which is designated as the Seder night. And kibbutzim that have matzah and lo aleinu bread on the table for years, but some kind of their kind of peculiar declaration of the Exodus and freedom and liberation and what it means. Very different than the classical interpretation and understanding, but it's undeniable. There's a certain connection to Pesach and the Pesach Seder that remains irrevocable. The Haggadah, it would follow then, that the Haggadah, after the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the Haggadah is the most popular single part of Jewish ritual liturgy that has been published in dozens of languages and disseminated around the world, and the most common possession of Jews, even when they don't have other books of the classical Torah literature. Question is why? Part of the reason that we'll take that as our first question. Second question is that the 4 expressions of Geula that we find, that we quote on the Seder night. The Rebbeinu Shalom says, "L'chein emol levnei Yisrael ani Hashem v'hotzesi eschem mitachas sivlos Mitzrayim." I'm going to take you out of your suffering, the endurance of what you're experiencing in Mitzrayim. There are those in Sfar Makdoshim, Gedolei Meforshim, that explain mitachas sivlos Mitzrayim to mean from that you have become accustomed, you've learned to put up with it, you've learned to endure the situation in Mitzrayim. But let's read it simply. You're suffering in Mitzrayim. So that's one votzetzi. I've taken you out. Vitzalti, and I have saved you. V'lokachti, and I have taken you unto me as a people. I skipped over Go'alti, V'ga'alti. So again, V'otzesi, 1. V'ga'alti, I've redeemed you. V'lakachti, and I've taken you unto me for a people. So we have 4 Lashonos over here. There's the number 4 seems to be a recurring number. It is in fact a recurring number, and the 4 kosot, the 4 cups that we drink of wine, the arba kosas, correspond to the four lashonis of gula: v'otzeisi, v'itzalti, v'go'alti, v'lokachti. Meshech Chochma draws a correspondence that between when we drink the cups and each one of these terms. If you have, if the Jews were exactly, there has to be some difference between A and B for me to separate A and B. If they are exactly identical and absorbed one into the other, then how do you extract one from the other? How do you separate them? Klal Yisrael had a certain sense of kedusha. They were maintaining family allegiance and purity, even though they were serving idolatry, but they maintained that connection to family. So that allowed for the first vote, Seti, to extricate one from the other. That corresponds to Kiddush, the cup of Kiddush. V'galti, I have redeemed you. That corresponds to, what is Ga'alti? Ga'alti means that there's a certain sense of connection to where I come from. I've redeemed you because I have a connection to the past. That connection to the past is the sense of coming from someplace, the difference between an Eved, he has no history, he has no yichus, he has no pedigree. But Klal Yisrael had a certain amount of loyalty to the earlier generations. So that allowed, that's the first part of Hallel, which refers back to history, the connection that Am Yisrael has to antiquity. Then there's Vitzalti. If there's a pursuer and a pursued, a Rodef and a Nirdof. So I have to be able to differentiate between the Rodef and the Nirdof. Most conflicts of that nature revolve around differences in intrusion upon the boundaries of some person's material possessions, money matters. So that brocha, if we recognize that all panosa comes from the Rebbeinu Shalom, do I have to do a hishtadlus, some kind of endeavor? Yeah, I do. But ultimately, the success is going to be determined by the Rebbeinu Shalom. So that brocha of the hitzalti, to differentiate, that there can then be a relaxation of the tension, the friction between people, will be on Birkas Hamazon. And v'lokachti, I'm taking you to my people, that'll be on Birkas Hamazon, and then lokachti will be on the future, that part of Hallel, which is a projection that the Rebbeinu Shalom is taking Am Yisrael for the future to be his people. So we have the four Lashonis of Gula. There's a number of fourness. Four corresponds with the matriarchs. There were four matriarchs. Yaakov had two wives, Sarah, Rivka, and then Rachel and Leah, two married to Yaakov. The patriarchs were three. Shlomo Melech tells us, Shma b'ni musar avicha, listen to the ethic of your father. Al titosh, don't abandon Torah simecha, the Torah of your mother. The difference between the two surely seems to be that the musar of your father is external to yourself. You have to allow it admittance. It's coming from the outside in. Al titosh, don't do an action to uproot. Don't do an action to undo your connection to the Teres Imecha. In fact, you're born a Jew because your mother was Jewish. Somebody can become an halachic Jew, and do gerus. But if somebody is to be born a Jew, that is determined by the mother. He had no choice in that. The child that was just born, that is, the Rebbeinu Shalom fixed that. So the Rebbeinu Shalom fixes certain realities, and our free will is within the boundaries of that which the Rebbeinu Shalom has determined is the court on which we are going to play out the scenario of our lives. We can maximize it, or chas v'sholom, miss the opportunities of the potential that has been given to us. And so, forness, the matriarchal syndrome, represents what we would call isarusa, what is called isarusa de le'ila, the arousal from above. The Rebbeinu Shalom reaching to Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael Mitzrayim were not searching for the Rebbeinu Shalom. The Rebbeinu Shalom was looking for them. And just like the Moshe Chaim Luzzatto tells us in Derech Hashem, when we come back to a Yontif, we are not commemorating something that happened way back then. We are now coming to a space in time that we are revisiting that reality. So every time Pesach comes around, we are in fact revisiting the Rebbeinu Shalom's reaching to us. And that secular Jew that feels something awakening within him, it's not because he's out there looking for it, but the Rebbeinu Shalom is looking for him Pesach time. Perhaps that has something to do with the ultimate Gula. There is a position in Chazal, will be Pesach time, that Pesach was implied, embedded, rooted in the original Gula, which that Gula, that Golus in Mitzrayim, that exile in Mitzrayim, and the redemption from Mitzrayim act as a collective historic vaccination against being infected with the negativeness, with the nastiness, the virus of Golus in history. Every Golus that Klal Yisrael would in the future experience was somehow in that Egyptian Mitzrayim experience, and then they would build up Klal Yisrael, the antibodies in history, to be able to withstand it through the Golus experience that they were able to be extricated. The Rebbeinu Shalom, though, had to pluck them out that time. And so it's a foreness. There's a foreness that is revisited. One of the principles that we have, just like what the Derech Hashem said, is that we're coming back to that experience. It's a place in time. There's another principle that we're taught, that the Sefer HaChinuch teaches, is on the mitzvah of not to chew the bone of the Paschal lamb, the Korban Pesach, lo sishbu, not to break it and chew it, because that is comparable to how a downtrodden slave mentality would be chewing it. It's inappropriate for our posture, our demeanor of aristocracy on the night of the Seder. Continues the chinuch on that mitzvah, and he says that don't ask me why we need so many mitzvahs to commemorate Yetzias Mitzrayim. Okay, I got the message. There is a Yetzias Mitzrayim, and I have to communicate it and remember it, because since man is this strange blend, paradoxical combination of the material and the spiritual, he is affected by his experience and it shapes his mentality. His mentality is shaped by his experience, to the extent, says the chinuch, that if you take an evil man and you bribe him, gently coerce him into doing positive things, he will eventually develop a certain kind of a sympathy. It'll come from the outside in, and he'll begin to experience a certain feeling for the good. And the contrary, you take a good man and put him in a negative environment, and he is forced into negative experiences, so then he will eventually experience an erosion of resistance to the evil. Odom nifal lefi pulosov. Malachim don't have that problem. Malachim transcend the physical. They are their shlichus. A man is given choices. Sometimes it works from the existing state, which will shape your experience. The existing state psychologically. Man is a psychological, not a logical entity, because he is this blend of the physical, the spiritual, and the emotional, which makes the link between the two. Lahavdil, psychologists say, don't go into a supermarket to make an order when you're hungry. You're going to buy things that you don't need. What do you mean? I have it in my head. I know what I want. I know what No. Because you're a psychological entity. And the periphery of your vision and your emotional state and your physical hunger are going to now have an impact on what you think when you see it and when you're exposed to the Baruch Hashem. I've always had such a negative feeling about being in a supermarket and such a hunger to exit, to escape, that I think that it may have mitigated against the hunger to purchase what I didn't need. Any event, Meshech Chochmah writes on the Korban Pesach, we have, Moshe tells the Zkenim, Mishchu, Chu, collect them, pull. Those who have a Korban Pesach, they'll bring their Korban Pesach. Those who don't, they'll have to make a Kinyan Mashiach, and they'll bring it. There has to have a certain kind of a partnership in it. In a stake to make a Kinyan. But on another level, says the Meshech Chochmah, it means this same Korban Pesach, this same sacrifice of the Paschal Lamb that you're going to do, is the very idolatry of the Egyptians. What is idolatry? Idolatry is in this root need to bridge between the physical experience and the spiritual and the intellectual. And that man has a need to translate the idea into concretion. There's a certain impetus in the nature to bridge that. And that was the driving force, the mistaken position of Ovdei Avodah Zorah, is that they idolatrized people, ideas that they felt needed an urgency to render it concrete. Sounds strange to us today that the aseh, take this sheep and this try and idolatrize him, but given the relationship to the constellations, to astrology, and the different forms and shapes that it takes, the idea of the seh, the shore, I also think of the Havdil, P.G. Wodehouse, was a very, very popular author that less than great literature according to most critics, and but it was more than good, good plus. He had a friend, he was defending this designation as being less than great literature, and he said he had a friend at Oxford from India that went back home, and the fellow wrote him back that in this fellow's home, this Oxford alumnus, they had cows roaming freely, walking through the house because they are deemed holy in that society. And this cow walked into the living room and over to the bookshelf, and there was a Shakespeare, W.B. Yeats, some great literature over there, and a copy of P.G. Wodehouse Jeeves. And the cow selected the P.G. Wodehouse Jeeves and ate that book. So Wodehouse said he quotes that as somehow a vindication of there are those that have a preference for his writings and his creativity. This sense, now Klal Yisrael is being taken. Our governing principle is that you cannot erase human proclivities, needs, predispositions. They're there. They're part of the map of the personality of the being human, and each particular human being in his fashion. But that has to become kedusha, it has to be sanctified. What it means is I have the choice, and I'm equipped with the tools to govern, control the timing. It's all about timing. And so it's not accidental that this very animal that was served from an astrological point of view, from a whatever was their ritual, tradition, and heritage that they passed through the generations, it was worshipped. The animal, the material, the concrete. Says Rabbi Simcha, that very animal, what we're going to do is take it and use it as a sacrifice to be mechapa, to atone for the Jews having served idolatry in Mitzrayim. And it's a timing is what it's all about. if it's within a context that has the ability to, that I can employ the tools, then Klal Yisrael is reaching back and is opening up their hearts and minds to the timing. That's what Chometz is all about. Timing. Why is Chometz more comparable to the evil inclination, the id, the Yetzer Hara, than other prohibited kinds of food, chelev, nevela? Because Chometz is about timing. Like this year, in the morning Shabbos, we're going to do Shminiot Bavir, acrobatics, halachically, how to have lechem, mishnah, and a suda. Not yet eat matzah because it's too early. Timing. It's all about timing. Timing is a creation of the Ribbono Shel Olam, and the Ribbono Shel Olam has taught us, instructed us, given us the intuitive sensitivity on how to be in rhythm to the timing, to maximize the potential of the energy that could go awry or could go astray. Ben Hashem is a helfen that we should enjoy the siyata d'shmaya that we're experiencing as Klal Yisrael reaches to open up their hearts to the Ribbono Shel Olam reaching to us. Should be a chag kosher v'somayach.